Thank you, Katie.
Okay. So Patricia Walsh Chadwick had a 30-year career on Wall Street as a research analyst, a portfolio manager, and eventually as a global partner at Invesco. In 2000, she started Ravengate Partners, LLC, a consulting firm engaged in expert witness work and strategic analysis. Patricia sits on the board of directors of WEC Energy Group, a Wisconsin utility, Amica Mutual Insurance Company, and two mutual fund families, Voya and the Royce Funds. Among her many pro bono activities, she mentors middle school girls at Our Lady Queen of Angels School in East Harlem. Patricia lives in Greenwich, Connecticut with her husband, John. Her passions include worldwide travel and the opera. Welcome, Patricia, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. I asked a question a few minutes ago, and I'm going to assume that most of you have not read the book. So I'm going to try to give a little précis, a little summary of the book, and then happy to go into questions and answers. Little Sister came out in April of 2019. And it is a memoir, and it's a story of my growing up in the 1950s and 60s. I wrote the book over the last 10 years, or 10 years prior to it being published. And it took me 10 years to write it. I think it's important that this is not a mommy dearest story. I consider this story to be a love story about a family that could not be broken. I dedicate the book to my parents, saying to Mother and Daddy, for always letting me know that you loved me. I wrote the book because, and I said this to my parents, it was my 55th birthday. Fortunately, both of them were alive, and we were actually sitting up, looking out over the ocean in Rhode Island. And I said to them, I've been thinking about writing the stories of my childhood. And I said, and I had a woman recently reach out to me and say, I don't really understand this, but I did say to them, I look back on my childhood with a lot of pleasure. They were both hugely supportive of my writing the book. But it took me 5 years to even start to know how I was going to do it. I had some real anxieties. Mostly they surrounded the fact that I was fearful that people would hate my parents. And I didn't hate them. And in large measure, it's very important that I dedicated the book to my parents, because there is certainly a dark valley that one goes into, or a deep valley. But ultimately, the story resolves itself very wonderfully. And as I said, I always knew that my parents loved me. So, but I also felt that, as I told my parents at the time, I was 55. And I said, 50 years from now, there will be no more eyewitnesses to this story. I can only tell my own story, but my story is very similar to that of 38 other children with whom I grew up. And the organization was basically about 100 people, 60 adults and 39 children. And I said, better to have an eyewitness version than just hearsay. It took me 5 years before I actually put pen to paper. And by then, my father had died. He was practically 90 when he died. My mother, however, who was 12 years younger than he, ended up reading my whole book. And she said, there are parts of it that make me sad, but she said, it's all true and you need to publish it. So I felt really as though I had the support of both my parents in publishing the book. I'll just tell you one other thing before then going into the story a little bit. When my book came out, I had been anxious that the other 38 children, now sadly, there were 39 of us and 6 have already died, but that the children that I grew up with who were still living, I was fearful that they might be upset, that I would have been opening up something that they didn't necessarily want to divulge. Though I changed names and I don't mention names, I was very, very careful that way. But quite the opposite happened. Of the 30-odd children that are still alive, and we're not children, we're in our 60s and our 70s, but that's how we think of ourselves. Of those, 2/3 of them have reached out to me and said, thank you so much for writing this book. And I came to realize, and I've stayed in touch with some closely and some kind of tangentially over the years. But I came to realize that many of them have suffered from PTSD, and many of them have been in therapy for decades. And in some cases, they had cut off correspondence with others, with the rest of us. And in one case, one gal just reached out to me, and she and I are now so close, and we talk at least once a week. So I think that there was, fortunately, a lot of good that also came out of writing this book. I thought that, so I wrote the book, and in my own mind, this was a story of my upbringing. It was weird, it was different. There were parts of it that were very upsetting to me, but there were also, it was a very rule-bound organization, and once you get to know the rules, you've got to make life happy one way or another. And so there were 1,000 things I did that I had such a wonderful time doing. But it was while I was writing the book, and I have twin children who are now 26 years old. So I was 45 when they were born. And my daughter came home from college one weekend when she was about 20, and they're now 26. So this was, 6 years ago when I was still writing the book, but pretty much getting the manuscript together. And she said, "Mom, I have 2 things to tell you." My ears perked up. I said, "Okay." She said, "The first thing is you need to stop everything until you finish this book," which really surprised me, because you know how kids can be at a certain age. They go, "Oh my God, how do I even explain my mother to my friends?" And the second thing that she said was, "And you've got to accept the fact that you grew up in a cult." That really threw me for a loop, because to me, a cult was Jim Jones. And I remember that incident. Or the Branch Davidians. And I remember that very well. And I remember feeling, they were behind this stockade fence somewhere in Texas. And I remember feeling one with them, because I knew what it was like to be in a situation where it was you against the whole world. But I never thought of my own home, of my own community, of people I really loved, as being a cult. And that was extremely valuable for me to think about. I now completely accept that she was right. I see all the cult formation elements in the entire story, but I'm also really happy that I didn't write it thinking about it as a cult. I simply told my story. And by telling my story honestly and truthfully and as vividly and creatively as I could, I just felt that was in the benefit of hindsight, that was the best way to do it. And I'm still so happy. Otherwise, I might have been contrasting and comparing. And I don't think that that's what the story was meant to be all about. So I admit that, I think that for the most part, I have accepted everything that many people have now told me, that frankly, there was something truly unhealthy. And you might say, why did your parents do this? My mother was a convert to Catholicism. She converted when she was 18 years old, at the same time she met my father. My father, who was 12 years older than she, had fought basically the whole of the war as a naval officer on the USS Enterprise. We have his diary, and there are days in it that he writes and says, "I cannot talk about what I saw today," or "I think I better stop writing now." So I don't know precisely what made them, and I'll go into the details a little bit, but I do think that there may have been something that was almost like a PTSD for many of the men that were there. They were highly educated, they were intelligent, they were intellectual, and I think somehow perhaps my father got drawn in a way. So let me go back to the beginning of the story, which is 1940, 8 years before I'm born. And a woman named Catherine Clark was a married woman with 2 children and a Catholic woman. And she started a club for Harvard and Radcliffe students, a Catholic club, not unlike a Newman Club, which my father had founded up at Bates University, Bates College, where he went. And the club became so successful, and it was part social and part intellectual. And she would serve tea every afternoon. And then students started coming from Boston College and other colleges that weren't even Catholic colleges. And she would have lecturers come in. And one of the lecturers was a priest, a Jesuit priest, who was very, very popular at the time. And his name was Father Leonard Feeney. And his Thursday night sessions, where he gave, a talk, generally on some part of theology or philosophy or something, were so overwhelmingly popular that this woman, Catherine Clark, reached out to the Archbishop of Boston, who at the time was Richard Cushing, who became Richard Cardinal Cushing, and said basically, I want Father Feeney to be the chaplain for the center. He approved, as did Feeney's Jesuit superior. And so in 1943, right in the middle of the war, Leonard Feeney came on and became the chaplain. And so in essence, the two of them were deemed to be the leaders of what was called at that time, St. Benedict Center. In the aftermath of the war, my father came home and he was getting a graduate degree at Boston College in philosophy. And he was teaching both mathematics the first year and then mathematics and philosophy the second year. And he was introduced to the center by one of his professors, a Lebanese man named Fakhri Malouf, who had his PhD in philosophy and who had also studied at Harvard. And he was now heading the philosophy department at Boston College. And then there was another man, a very close friend of theirs, who was a PhD in physics. And the three of them, we called them, later on, referred to them as the three professors. And they all taught at Boston College. After the war, Father Feeney's approach started to change. He had always been a very social and engaging person. But when the bombs fell on Japan, he suddenly took a very different approach and said that this was an ungodly act and that the problem lay with the teachers in the universities and colleges in the country. Not just Catholic, but Harvard, Radcliffe, Boston College, it didn't matter. That there was a form of liberalism that was being taught. And over that period of time, he suddenly found himself being far less popular, but he had a small cadre of individuals who supported him. And by the time my parents came, my father came in 1946, right after he got out of the war. My mother walked into the center, as it was called, in March of 1947. She wasn't even a Catholic then, and she was meeting Father Feeney for the first time. She had done all the training. And the day she walked in, she met my father, Jim Walsh. 2 weeks later, she was baptized as a Catholic. And then 3 months later, they were engaged. 6 months later, they were married in September of 47. And August of 48, I was born. By the time 1948 came along, the Archbishop, so Father Feeney had basically taken a very traditional, might be the best word to use, traditional interpretation of a dogma of the church that said, you've got to be Catholic to be saved. And we know that a number of religions say you've got to belong to their own religion to be saved. And there's no doubt that the Catholic Church has held that dogma for years and years. They don't really espouse it anymore. But Father Feeney held on to that. And a small cadre of these young students and young professors as well sided with him on that. And the Archbishop said, please don't do that. We're trying to be more ecumenical. And Feeney said, no way. That is the dogma. My mother, of course, she was a brand new Catholic. Why did she become a Catholic if she didn't believe that dogma? So I can see the kind of complicated emotional impact on everything. But by the time 1948, the fall semester came around, the president of Boston College called those three professors in and basically said, you can't be teaching Feeney's dogma. They didn't agree to that, but they were still allowed to teach. That December, Cushing, Archbishop Cushing, told Father Feeney he could no longer practice as a priest in the Archdiocese of Boston. And the Jesuit provincial said, you're going to get up, you're going to leave the center, you're no longer the chaplain, you're to go out to Holy Cross College in Worcester, different diocese, and you're going to teach English. And Father Feeney said, no, I won't do that. So he could see what was coming down. And in January of 1949, I was 5 months old. 51 of the young adults that were supporting this Father Feeney and Catherine Clark and Father Feeney actually created a religious order that they called the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. My parents signed the document. That document is, extant to this day, and we have many copies of it. But the fact of the matter is, Feeney also required them to take a vow of obedience to him. And as I've looked back and thought about the story of what happened over the next 20 years, it was that vow that they took to obey Father Feeney that ultimately had such a huge impact on their lives and on the lives of their children. In April of 49, the 3 professors were fired. And on Easter Monday in April of 49, just a few days later, the Archbishop of Boston told Feeney, you can no longer, you have no more priestly functions. So now this group of 55-ish adults went underground. My father had no job, neither did Fakhri Malouf, who was obviously paid very well as the head of the philosophy department. And what happened was that all of these men and women, a number of them were married couples with children. There were about 4 children among them and 11 or 12 married couples, some of them very young, 20, 21, 22 years old. They all put all of their possessions together. My parents had just bought a 3-family house on the GI Bill. They sold that house and they turned the money over to Feeney and Catherine Clark. They also brought with them all the wedding presents that they had been given. And all of a sudden, here we were, a community of 60 adults and children now starting to get born at a pretty rapid rate. And I remember I have wonderful, wonderful memories of my earliest years when I was 2 and 3 and 4 years old. And I just thought I had this fantastic world. I had all these uncles and aunts, as I thought of them. And I knew every one of them by name. And they would take me down by the Charles River and pick, buttercups, and we would go through Harvard Square. And it was just kind of a magical thing. And we met every single morning for Mass, which had to be said in secret, because remember, now Father Feeney had been told he was not allowed to perform his priestly functions. So we had code words for everything. And when I was 3 years old, I knew all the code words. And the code word for Mass was first breakfast. And the code word, and then our regular breakfast that we ate right after that was called second breakfast. And to this day with my family, I will say, not my children, but my siblings will say, if anybody want, what do you want for second breakfast? Or something like that. It's just part of our, our vocabulary. But there were a lot of code words because we were afraid that people would find out who we were and would make trouble. But what happened over the next few years is they bought a cluster of houses. And now I'm going to tell you, everybody had to obey Father Feeney. And the woman that started the whole thing, Catherine Clark, she and he were the leaders. They were pretty autocratic and they were like deities. And all of a sudden, and I remember the changes that started to come. The first changes were that people stopped wearing what we called worldly clothes. They had all kinds of, pink and whatever, flowered dresses, whatever. And they all started wearing the same colored outfit. And then the next thing that happened was we had to, everybody changed their names. And suddenly when I was about 4 years old, I was no longer allowed to call my mother and father, mommy and daddy. My mother, who was Betsy to everyone, became now Sister Elizabeth Ann. My father became Brother James Aloysius. And that's what I called them. I never really thought about it very much. And I'm going to actually share a screen with you so that I can show you some pictures. So just very quickly, can you see the screen okay, everybody? Perfect. So these were my parents right before they got married. And there they are being, at my grandparents' house where they were married, and there's Father Feeney between them. And then these were the professors along with the high school on the day that they were all fired. And this is me. So you can see my mother in this picture. You can see I'm the oldest one there. My sister Kathy's on the right, and my brother David is only about 3 or 4 months old. So that would have been 1951. So I was just 3 years old, and you can see she's already wearing black shoes, all laced up, a black coat, and a hat, which is what they always wore when they went out. You see my father's suit is black, his tie is black, and that little pin is actually a medal of the Virgin Mary. And then this is the following summer when I am just about to be 4. And there's my sister Kathy and my brother David. And you can see my father's in that kind of, it's a suit, but it's the same that everyone else wore. So by 1953, this is what they looked like. And I knew every one of these people. And my mother is here, the 4th one in. My father's in the back on the right. Sister Catherine's right in the middle on the front. And Father Feeney is right there behind her in the first row of the men. So that was my family. That was how I thought of them. And then, and this was taken in 1956. This was in the summer of 54, the summer of 1954. And in the fall of 1954, in November, there was the most, for me, dramatic change. All of a sudden that day, those of us children who were 3 years and older, I was fortunately 6. So I had actually been able to spend some real time with my parents. We were separated from our parents. And what had been our family's apartment, and I think I mentioned that we had bought about 7 houses, and we had put this red stockade fence around the houses. This is right in the center of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And all of a sudden, what had been my parents' house, which was the 3rd floor of a 3-family house, became the communal living space for the children. And in one day, my parents' furniture was moved out, and I basically had to say goodbye to them from the standpoint of what it was all about, living with them. And my father told the most wonderful bedtime stories, and suddenly, all of a sudden, there were no more bedtime stories. And the rules and the regulations were, kind of, well, they were left to one person under Sister Catherine's authority to make the rules. And this person basically had a very, very different idea about raising children than my parents ever had. And so then from there, for the next 3 years, we lived in Cambridge. And then when I was 9 years old, we moved from Cambridge to Still River. And Still River was about 40 miles west of Boston, bucolic countryside. It was absolutely great. But the minute we moved there, and I remember thinking this is going to be so beautiful and so much fun, and we'll have fields to run in and all of that kind of thing. But the moment we got there, all of a sudden, Catherine Clark, whom everybody called now Sister Catherine, was absolutely, undeniably the ruler of the center. Father Feeney then started to play a back role. He was now in his early 60s. He seemed more frail. She was nearly 6 feet tall. She had broad shoulders, red hair. She was really an authoritarian woman. And within a few weeks, we were suddenly no longer allowed even to speak to our parents. And from there, the rules and the regulations just became more and more draconian, is probably the best way of describing it. And Sister Catherine had a mission, and her mission was that all 39 children, so we were now a total of 39 children, ranging in age. The youngest was born in 55. So in 1958, she was 2.5. And the oldest was 10. But our mission, and we were told that we had been dedicated to God from our infancy. And our mission was to become nuns, like our mothers, and brothers, no priests, only one priest who was Father Feeney, but brothers like all the fathers were. We were called little sisters because we were still children, and the boys little brothers, and there were big sisters and big brothers, and thus the name of my book. But Sister Catherine went farther than that. Not only did she cut us off from our parents, she also instituted some hideous physical punishments. She dubbed something that she called the Big Punisher, which was a 2.5, 3-foot piece of garden hose that she would use, and that the women whom she had hand selected, the women who were bringing us up, they were called angels. There were 8 of them, and any one of them could use this Big Punisher anytime they wanted. And there were some children who were, in fact, were beaten daily, or were beaten more than daily, or were beaten for 10 days in a row for doing things that you might even just think were humorous. It was, but you know, that being said, life continued on. We were not allowed to speak to our parents. And when we got up to Still River, Sister Catherine, and perhaps Father Feeney, but much more Sister Catherine, kind of handpicked what jobs people would have. And this is another sign of the cult impact. As often happens, you know, the grown-ups had already now been told they couldn't contact their families anymore. And now when we moved to Still River, she took all the intellectual people and had them doing menial jobs. And my father, who obviously was a mathematician and had been studying theology and philosophy, it was his responsibility to fix the automobiles. And you can imagine with 100 people, we had quite a few automobiles. Yeah, I didn't think too much about the complexity of what was being done there. But for me, the fact that my father was fixing the cars, they were done right in front of the main house. So every day we had 2 major houses there, and you'd have to walk back and forth between them to go to mass, to go to meals, to go to school, whatever. And so I got to see him every day. I wasn't allowed to speak to him, but for me, I felt great that I was able to see him. And what he started to do with not just me, but with my 3 younger siblings and my 3 younger sisters and my younger brother. So I was the oldest of 5. When we would go by, he would pick his head up from whatever he was doing in the, you know, under the hood of the car. And he would just go like this, which was his way of saying hello. And he and I then developed a little secret way of communicating. And when we moved to Still River, birthdays were annihilated. We no longer had birthdays. We only had feast days. So my birthday was in August and his birthday was in July. And on our respective birthdays, we would find each other. You couldn't go and give a big hug or a kiss or anything like that. We would just find each other. And sometimes we would just pass each other in the yard and I'd say, happy birthday. And on my birthday, he would say the same thing. And I do really strongly feel that it was those kinds of his breaking the rules that was the glue that held me together, and that ultimately made me realize completely that he loved me. And my mother, who was often in the kitchen or sewing, I would sometimes have to work side by side with her. And she taught me so much about cooking. But the fact of the matter is she wasn't really allowed to talk to me, able to do a job next to her, even though we couldn't talk, just made me happy. So I think there are lots of ways in which one could find happiness. That being said, we were self-supportive. We had a huge farm. We had chickens, 300 chickens. We had turkeys, we had pigs at one point. We had a dairy farm. We were self-sufficient on eggs and milk and butter. And we also eventually had did canning, which I to this day do and love every fall. But we had pear orchards and apple trees. And in the summertime, you know, 39 children are a great source of labor, free labor. And we would can all of our fruits. And, you know, I learned, there were so many things that I learned. We went swimming, we went horseback riding. Everyone had a dog, a cat, a duck, a rabbit, something or other. And so you know, it's important for me to express that this was not an environment in which I was sobbing myself to bed every night. That being said, it could also be terrorizing on account of, you know, the punishments that were meted out. But by the time I got to be 12 or 13, I started to be anxious and nervous because I realized that Sister Catherine was heading me down a path in which I was going to become a nun, and I did not want to be a nun. My dream, my daydream, which I had over and over, is that I would be sitting in a beautiful garden and there would be a high stone wall around it. And then this prince would come over the wall and would take me by the hand and we would fly off, and I would live in a castle and we would have a great family. And, you know, I mean, I started that daydream. It was a daydream when I was about 7, if I remember correctly. Well, by the time I became 12 or 13, and I think it's important to be pointing out that we were educated within the confines of our community there. And that we had no radio, no television, no newspapers, no magazines, no movies. And so we were very, very much contained. It was kind of us against the world. But we did have now these 200 acres of farmland. And when I was about 12 or 13, I was starting to get anxious because I realized I'm going to have to become a nun. And I couldn't see any way out. Sister Catherine determined everything that happened to everyone. And also, when I was about 13, I started getting interested in boys. And the little brothers were not of interest to me. They were mostly younger than I was. So I ended up getting this crush on one of the men of the adult men, the big brothers. And he was absolutely the youngest of them. He played the cello and he'd gone to Harvard. I don't know, I just thought he was so amazing. But I didn't realize what was happening because there was no education. You know, when you got your period, you were never told what it meant or what it was about. I will tell you, when I got mine, Sister Catherine said to me, our Blessed Mother had it as well. That was the degree to which there was any explanation of what it meant. So needless to say, when I ended up having a crush on someone, I didn't know what was happening either. So, but Sister Catherine's wrath came out, and I didn't know what a crush meant. I didn't know why it happened. I didn't know what to do about it. And then they kicked that brother out. And I thought, did I do something that made him kicked out? And then I ended up with another crush on another one. And then I was 14. So these two things are happening simultaneously. And Sister Catherine forces me with 7 other of the little sisters to become postulants, which for those many of you probably know, but is the first step in becoming a nun. A postulant, then a novice, and then you become a nun. That day was the most discouraging, disheartening day for me. I thought, the door is closing. I don't know what's going to happen. Meanwhile, I'm now a nun at the age of 14, and I still have this mad crush for this big brother, and it doesn't go away. And Sister Catherine rails on me. You know, you are never to go near him. You are never to be seen within 500 feet of him, blah, 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 blah. And I would still try to sneak little ways, never talk to him. We weren't allowed to talk to him. I just wanted to see him. And finally, this was going on. I was now 16, I was 17. I still had the same crush. I am sure he knew what was happening, but I didn't know what was happening. Around that time, one of the big brothers went to his wife and said, I want out of here. I want you to come with me, join me. We will leave. I will finish my degree in law and I will make a home for us. And I want us to take our 5 boys with us. And she said no. So he was kicked out. And believe you me, when you're kicked out of the center, you might as well be dead. And he turned around and sued for custody of his 5 boys. And he got it. And in the process of the court case, he basically made the statement, or his lawyers made the statement, that they did not think that our education was adequate. Now, the principal of our school was a woman named Sister Anne Mary. She was not an angel. She never put a hand on a child. She was a saint. She was a truly wonderful woman. She'd gone to Radcliffe. Her father had been a principal of a school in Clinton, Massachusetts, only 10 miles away from us. And she was the most wonderful principal of the school. The other teachers, some of them were great, some of them were not, but we learned, I mean, you know, we had a very, very classical education. I had 6 years of Latin by the time I graduated from high school. I had a year of Greek. We had mathematics. We had chemistry. Guess what we did not have? Biology. And to this day, I've never taken a course in biology. I thought I would do it when my children were taking it. And by then I was too busy and kind of lost interest. But the school was good. Some years later, it became even better when they took people like my father and, you know, other of the big brothers who knew physics and all that kind of stuff and incorporated him. But so I was now 16 years old, just turning 17. I was entering my senior year of high school, and Sister Catherine decided we were not, you know, accredited with the state of Massachusetts. So Sister Catherine decided that we needed to get accredited, very smart thing. And so I was asked to make application to 2 colleges, one of which was Bates, where my father had gone, and the other was Vassar. And I got into both of them, which of course meant the school would be accredited, and it was accredited. But 3-4 days after I got those letters, which of course went through Sister Catherine, she read everybody's mail going in and going out. I was told that I had to write a letter saying I would not be coming to the colleges. Now, I fully expected that. I knew they weren't asking me to apply to colleges because they fully planned to send me, because they railed against the liberal education in colleges across the country. So they had no intention of allowing me to go. And then in October of 1965, Sister Catherine called me into her office, and my mother was there. That was the first time I had ever been in Sister Catherine's office. And believe me, I'd been in her office so many times for getting into trouble in so many innocent little ways. And there was Sister Catherine with my mother. And Sister Catherine, in this dulcet, gentle tone of voice, tells me that not everyone has a vocation to become a nun. And I'm thinking, well, I know that, but okay. And I didn't quite get the gist of what she was telling me. And she starts telling me what it's like as a wife out in the world. And one of her statements, which remains in my head today, which is in my book. And she said, you know, dear, before your husband comes home every night, you have to run upstairs and set your hair and put lipstick on. And I'm thinking, what is she telling me? Talking to me? I mean, I've never had lipstick. I'm dying for lipstick. And all of a sudden, I realized that she was actually telling me I was going to have to leave. And then I was terrified. This was the only place I knew, the only people in the world I knew. And she's telling me that I can't stay in my home. And then she tells me, she's obviously informed my parents, and my mother's there. She tells me that I cannot tell anyone because they would be upset. So I go through the rest of my time in the organization to my graduation in June. And 1 hour after my graduation, no ability to say goodbye to anyone, I was gone. And I knew what happened when you were kicked out. You were then considered dead. Nobody would talk about you. And I thought, what are they going to say? I'm not going to see my siblings anymore, my sisters, my brother. And I spent the summer with one of my aunts, my father's sister. And then Sister Catherine allowed at the end of the summer that she would pay for me to go to a secretarial school. And while I did that, nobody up in Still River knew this, but I was living on the property in a separate house. And my mother would come over and have dinner with me every night. And my father would take me to the bus every morning so I could go in and go to school and come back. The moment I got my secretarial diploma, and I like to describe it as I had two numbers by which I was defined, how fast I could type and how fast I could take shorthand, I was on my own. And when I got my first job, I was now never to step foot back in Still River. That was Sister Catherine's edict. And I found myself a single room at the YWCA in the very unfashionable south end of Boston. And we had a communal bathroom down the hall. And that was my first apartment. Now, interestingly, almost 2 years to the day after Sister Catherine kicked me out, she died. And that was in May of 1968. And it was at that point, and this also should have been a sign to me that the place was a cult, the place started to fall apart. There were fights between the men and the women, the couples were against the others, and the children then started telling their stories of the abuse, not sexual, but the physical abuse that had taken place. And you've got to understand, I know it's hard for people to understand, the parents who were not angels, and unfortunately many of the angels were parents, but the parents who were not in charge of raising the children knew nothing. We were not allowed to speak to our parents. We had something called community meetings. And as time went on, they were 4 to 5 months apart. And you would have a community meeting on a Sunday morning that would last for 45 minutes. And when you haven't seen your parents or talked to them or been able to talk to them, obviously we see them, but for months on end, you're not going to sit down and tell them all the bad things that have happened. You end up telling them, showing them your report card, telling them about your pony or whatever. And they were shocked. I know people find it hard to believe, but I can promise you, they had no idea that was happening. And that began to break down the organization. And by 1969, my father left. My mother had, in essence, left by 1968. But my father left in 69 and brought 2 of my siblings out. By 1971, my other 2 siblings, who had become full nuns, had left. And we were a family again. And for the next 40 years, I can tell you, we were a family without rancor, without animosity. My father died, as I said, when I was just about 60 at the age of 90. My mother only died 2 years ago, also at the age of 90. And it was, in my book, I talk about conversations I've had with my parents. I will tell you one thing, my father told me one time, he said, your mother and I decided we were going to take all 5 of you out. This was when I was 12, which meant my baby sister was 6. And he then said, we were going to get up in the middle of the night, we were going to go in, wake you up. I kept thinking, well, how do they know which cubicle I was in? But they had this plan, and we're going to take one of the cars and just leave. And then my father said to me, and then what were we going to do? And he said, we kept coming back to the fact that we felt you were getting the best Catholic education by being there. And he said, all the changes that took place that we were told we had to do, we would talk to each other, my mother and he would talk to each other about it. And he said, in each case, he said, it was like, okay, one more thing, we will do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. And he said, there came a point where it was like a snowball. And he said, the snowball became too big to roll. And I can imagine what it's like when you have prevented someone from continuing on in their career. So my father stopped teaching in 1949. By 1960, he was 11, 12 years without teaching. And what was he going to do with a wife and 5 children, the youngest of whom was 6? And I can see how someone would say, I'll just live with it this way and I won't change it. But I can tell you when we all were back as a family, and by then I was practically on my way to living in Philadelphia for a couple of years, and by 1975 I was in New York, but we were very, very close as a family. And as I said, there was no animosity. I'll just end with I am writing a second book, by the way, and it's about my Wall Street career because I was very fortunate. My first job was as the receptionist at a brokerage firm. And that is the only reason I ended up with a Wall Street career. I put myself through college, but I knew nothing else. And I sometimes wonder if I had, gone to an automobile agency, would I have ended up having automobile agencies or something? I have no idea. But it was the only business I knew, and I just kept one foot in front of the other. But it was a stressful at times, but also full of kind of the craziness, not so much the craziness of Wall Street. I think I was too driven, but there is a Me Too story in the book, and it was, I thought I was 1 in 5 million people, and came to realize after Harvey Weinstein, and I wrote the story ahead of that, but that, I was probably 1 in 5, not 5 million. But basically, the new book is called Breaking Glass, and I'm writing it now. I'm hoping to have it finished in the middle of next year, and we'll have to see when it can get published, either end of next year or early in the following year. But I just want to end with one thing. I've done a number of engagements, and I've really enjoyed talking about my book and the journey. But one of them, a man asked me, what would you change in your life? And I thought, well, of course I would say I would like not to have been taken away from my parents. And I certainly wish there wasn't the violence. And so I'm not, I wasn't thinking so much about that. I put myself in my position now where I've been married for 35 years. I would marry my husband again. My children are wonderful. I mean, we have a wonderful, wonderful relationship. I have, had a wonderful career. I am engaged in so many not-for-profit, entities and, passions that I have. I've traveled the world, and I thought, how do I know if I had grown up in an entirely different way, if any of that would have happened? I mean, you can certainly say, yes, there are elements of my life that I wish had not happened. But I said, if I sit around and try to, say, oh, I wish, I might not be in this position. I might not have these children. I might not have my husband. So I said I wouldn't change anything. And I think that it's that sense of comfort that, I had parents that loved me. We ended up having a wonderful relationship. And if that had not been the case, I might be in a position to say, well, if you don't even have a good relationship with your parents, what's life worth? But I just felt that I would not change anything. So I'm going to stop. I hope there are a few questions, and I hope I haven't spoken for too long.
Hi there. No, this is great. Thank you for all of that. There are some questions that came in, so I'll just go down the list. Joe M. would like to know, as a child, what were the day-to-day rules and regulations?
Perhaps the biggest rule was silence. And boy, that was hard on me. I love to talk. And also within, in the chapel, you couldn't move a hair, and you could get spanked for, looking out the window instead of looking at the altar. But primarily it was very much, obey. So one of the rules when I was maybe 7, I was 6 when this all started. The person that was running it, who in the book I call Sister Matilda, she made a rule that we could no longer hold the hands of our little siblings. Now, I don't know whether this was her idea or whether it came down from Sister Catherine, but in a religious community, some of you may be familiar, there's something referred to as particular friendships, and you're supposed to be detached. And Sister Catherine was determined to make us detached from anyone and everyone, including our families. And so here you were not able to hold your siblings' hands. My baby sister was just a year old, and I wasn't living with her anymore. I was now 7. And I used to let her hold her hands around my fingers, and I would walk backwards as she's just learning to walk. And I suddenly realized I couldn't do that anymore. And one night I looked around and could see that Sister Matilda wasn't anywhere nearby. So I just broke the rule and walked with her. And suddenly I looked up in the window, and there was Sister Matilda looking down on me. And sure enough, she came out and called me in, and I got such a beating. So those were some of the kinds of rules. When we moved to Still River, not only could we not talk to the grown-ups, the little brothers and the little sisters couldn't talk to each other. So you were completely isolated. And I'm sure that what Sister Catherine's concern was was that she didn't want any relationships to build where boys and girls might then become interested in each other down the road. And, you can't thwart nature, you can't thwart God. And so those were the kinds of rules. Silence was it, and I was no good at silence. And that was one of the toughest rules for me.
Anne would like to know where in Cambridge the compound was.
So do you know where, if you know Cambridge, I'm going to assume you know Cambridge. So it was right off Putnam Avenue, and Putnam Avenue comes right into Mass Avenue, and Mass Avenue goes right into Harvard Square. So we took and so if you know where St. Paul's Church is, the center was a building directly across the street from St. Paul's Church. St. Paul's Church was where my parents were married, and it was directly across the street. So I used to see it because we would look out the window at the people who would be going to church there on Sunday. And so it was just down Putnam Avenue. And it's a street. It was a street called Hayes Street, Hayes. And it no longer exists. Martin Luther King School is now at the corner of what was Putnam Avenue and Hayes Street. But there are 3 other houses that we owned, one on Putnam Avenue that's still there, one on Banks Street that's still there, and one on a street parallel to Banks Street that are still there. But the red fence is torn down. I would have loved if that were still there, though who would have kept a red fence? Sister Gavin sold all of those houses when we moved to Still River. And, they weren't bad houses, but it was not a plush center of town.
Another question from Joe. What were some of the challenges you faced once you left?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was like an alien. As we had no newspapers, no television. I knew no movie stars. I had a man on a bus one day turn to me and said, "Has everyone ever told you you look like Lauren Bacall?" I had no idea who Lauren Bacall was. I had no idea who Frank Sinatra was, Marilyn Monroe. I had never heard a swear word. I had never even heard a slang word. So when I was thrown out into this world, it was like a foreign country, but a culturally completely different country. And I have kept my eyes open, my ears open, and my mouth closed for quite a while because I was terrified that I would give something away that would let people realize where I came from. Because in the Boston area, our group were called the Feeniites. That's what the press referred to us as, Feeniites. And when we lost the case, when Bob Colopy won the custody case, Time magazine wrote an article about us and saying that it was harder to get out than it was to get in. And basically, we were hated, completely hated. So I didn't want anyone to find out. So it was a cultural thing, and it was also hiding my story, which I did very, very well. And by the time I'd been out 3 years, I had really acclimated myself pretty much to the environment. But you know how you might say to someone, "Where did you grow up?" "Oh, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio." "Where did you go to college?" That's like a 3-minute story, engagement. I realized mine would be a 300-minute engagement. So I thought it was just best to shut up and say nothing. By the time I went to write my book, I had only told my story to 3 people. At the age of 60, I had only told 3 people. One of whom was my husband. One of whom was a man I'd been with for a number of years before he left me for a younger woman, and he was 20 years older than I, so that was probably well done. And one was a very close girlfriend. Now, I'm not saying other people didn't know, because I had a circle of friends that were friends of the center and, family and whatever. They all knew, but I never told the story. And so I went through my whole Wall Street career. By the time I got my degree and moved to New York, I was kind of on my own path, and I didn't feel as though I had to hide so much, but I didn't need to hide. There was enough distance between the time I had left and 1975, 9 years later. And so it was just easiest not to tell the story. I can tell you that I got a lot of shocked calls when the book came out, and it was like, I thought I was reading fiction. I said, well, truth is stranger than fiction. Is that helpful? That was David, I think, yeah.
So, okay. Rosabelle would like to know who provided the teaching, I guess while in the compound.
Yes. So I mentioned Sister Anne Mary, who had gone to Radcliffe. My English teacher in high school was the most brilliant, fabulous woman. She was an African-American woman. She was the only member of the center who was African-American. And she taught English. She had gone to Radcliffe herself. She was one of 4 children. Her father, I think, was kind of a janitor on the Harvard grounds or something like that. She was the baby in the family. She went to Radcliffe and graduated in 3 years, and then went and got her master's in education. And she was our English teacher, and she was phenomenal. I loved the French teacher. I hated the Latin teacher, but I was better at Latin than she was. It was all women, but Sister Anne Mary herself taught math. She was wonderful. But I started to say earlier, after Sister Catherine died, then some of the men started teaching. And there were men who, you know, knew physics really well. But Sister Teresa herself, I mean, Sister Teresa was the number 2 woman up there. She ran the whole farm. She had gone to Cornell, and she taught us chemistry. And, you know, I took chemistry as one of my achievement tests. So it was all women, and it was deliberately that way because Sister Catherine could control them. But the fact of the matter is, it was an education that allowed me to get into Vassar and Bates. Now, could it have been even better? I dare say it could have been. But, you know, I'm certainly not going to fault it.
Joe had asked, this, you may have answered this in your talk, to what extent were you able to maintain relationships with your siblings while on the compound and after?
Well, on the compound, I couldn't be in touch with my brother, but I would always keep my eye out for him. But my siblings were all around me. And a large part of my story, or a significant part of my story, is dedicated to the relationship with my sister Kathy, who was only 18, 20 months younger than I was. And when we were separated from our parents, her reaction and her response was very different from mine. Mine was kind of, okay, this is the way it is, I've got to survive. Hers was very different. She stopped eating. And so that was breaking a rule. You had to eat everything on your plate. And if she didn't eat her breakfast, they put it back in the refrigerator and brought it out for lunch. And then they would bring it out to dinner, which of course nobody could eat by then. And she was beaten terribly when she wouldn't eat. And so I kind of, while we were in Cambridge, so this is when she's only 7 and I'm 8, I would sometimes just sneak her bowl and eat her food so that she wouldn't get into trouble. Once we moved out to Still River, she was at a different table. There were 8 tables with 5 children and an angel. And Sister Catherine deliberately would split up the siblings. And so I wasn't able to. And she went till she was about 15 years old. And I said to her one day, you know, as I was writing the book, what was it that made you finally come around to eating? She said, well, there were a few things. Her angel was Sister Teresa, who was the prioress, the number 2 person. She said when I would be out with her and we would have to go shopping for things, she said she would always take me to McDonald's and just say, choose whatever you want and you can have it. And she said, I realized somebody cared and I couldn't make a choice. But she said the real thing that happened was when she took a test and she failed the test, and the nun in charge failed everybody but one person in the class who happened to be her own son. And Kathy told me, she said, I had it. I walked over to Sister Catherine's office. I knocked on her door and I said, you have got to fix this. And she said, I told her what happened. And Sister Catherine said, don't worry, I will take care of that. And Kathy said, she was 14, I think, at the time. She said, I found out that I had a voice. And she said, once I had a voice, then I knew how to use it. So that was interesting. And there's a story in my book also about finding my own voice. And I was also 13 years old. And my angel was a difficult woman. And I won't tell the story, but she and I got into this battle of the wills, and I decided, fine, I'm just not going to talk to her. And it went on for a week, and she finally, with tears in her eyes, said, are you never going to talk to me again? And I said, you didn't believe me when I told you the truth. And then I realized, wow, I had some power, I had some control. And it was a good feeling, and we were friendly again after that, but I also learned a lesson.
Okay. Joe would like to know, was the order sanctioned by Rome? What was the relationship with the Vatican? And what was the impact of Vatican II on the group?
Well, I'll tell you about Vatican II. They thought Vatican II was heretical. And I have just read a wonderful book by Sister Helen Prejean, you know, the woman who wrote Dead Man Walking. She's written a book about her early life as a nun. And she was about 17 years old when she went into the convent. And you know, it's for her, Vatican II was the ability for her to blossom and open up and find out that even in religious life you could have a career. And obviously her dedication to the prison ministry was phenomenal. Okay, so I kind of got off track. He wanted to know
if the order was sanctioned by Rome and what the relationship was.
So Vatican II was the easy one, but no, we were sanctioned by Rome. Father Feeney was excommunicated in 1953 or 4 something. And it wasn't because he held this dogma of the Catholic Church, there's no salvation outside the church, because you can't excommunicate him for that, because that is a dogma. But he was excommunicated for disobedience. When his superiors told him to go to Holy Cross, and he didn't, you might have said, well, that's not an excommunicatable item, and it isn't. But then the Vatican called him. The Pope's office, Pope Pius XII, said, basically, come. We want to talk with you about what's going on. And he refused. So basically, they felt that they had a renegade group. And they were renegade. And not only were we renegade in the sense that we were condemning absolutely everyone who was not part of our community to hell, but Sister Catherine also developed this completely, this neurosis, if that's the right description, about Russia and the communists and how we were going to be run over by the communists, and we were going to have to flee into the desert, and then they were going to come and they were going to find us, and they were going to, you know, we were all going to become martyrs, and we were all then going to go to heaven right away because we've been martyred. And I kept thinking, well, if we're going to get martyred, then why don't we just stay here and get martyred right away instead of going out to the desert? But I had already decided to myself, I was never going to get martyred. I was going to, you know, if I needed to be a communist, I'd be a communist. I was not going to be martyred. So you can see I wasn't very good, non-material. I couldn't follow all those rules. But so yes, but in 1972-3, Cardinal Medeiros and Cardinal Wright, but I think it became Cardinal Flanagan because I think Wright died, basically came to the center and said, we want you to come back. We want to make it, you know, the excommunication over. And Rome was fine with that. Father Feeney himself was about 76 years old when that happened. He had Parkinson's disease and he was very frail. And, you know, nobody really knows if he truly understood what was happening. But the place that was St. Benedict Center in Still River, the men's house there is now a Benedictine abbey. It's called St. Benedict's Abbey. And it's the very same house that I grew up in. So they have really associated themselves with the Benedictine. But truth be told, and it's very true, they to themselves hold the dogma of no salvation outside the Catholic Church. And in order to be a monk there, you have to believe that. There are some wonderful people there, but that's their own personal choice and their personal belief. They won't say it to anyone's face. They won't engage someone and say, you're not going to heaven, but that's what they believe.
Geraldine would like to know, to what extent were you able to go out into the community, if at all?
You mean off our premises?
That's what I took it to mean, yeah.
Well, never alone. And after I left, I think some things were loosened. After Sister Catherine died, a lot of things were loosened. But while we were there, you know, we would all of our clothes were made there. So we never went to a shop. I'd never been in a restaurant. I'd never been in a clothing store. There was only one place that we went, which was to a shoe store. And that was the only outside engagement we ever, or the dentist or the doctor. We didn't go to the doctor very often. I had, unfortunately, troubling teeth. So I found myself in the dentist chair more often than I ever would have wanted. But for the most part, we were very much, though Father Feeney would take us on rides. He would go, he couldn't stand living in the country. He really wanted to be with people. And so sometimes he would take us on afternoon trips, which wasn't always very exciting because he would then take us into the homes of people that he had met and was friendly with. And he would tell us that, you know, we needed to sing the Te Deum for them or recite all the, you know, doctors of the church or engage with them. But he was always trying, and I think this was very beautiful and very lovely. He was always trying to convert people. And that was his mission. And so we were often with it. And believe me, he had a prison ministry as well. And I remember he would take us to the Concord Reformatory, which was a heavy duty security men's jail in Concord. And he would have us go in and sing the Ave Maria for the prisoners. And I used to be terrified, and I didn't know a prisoner from a guard. And, you know, frankly, maybe I never did meet a prisoner, but whatever we were doing, we had to sing songs for them. And I remember being so fearful that maybe we were going to get killed before we got out of there. And I was only about 12 years old at the time, but we didn't associate much. We would go over to Fort Devens on Saturday mornings and watch the Army band and the military, you know, formation. We were members of Our Lady's Army, and that's all told in the book. And we used to parade ourselves up and down the highway on the first Saturday of the month with our band and our horses and our flags and everything. So, you know, it was complicated by what things we were allowed to see. Father would sometimes take us to football games in Clinton and Leominster. Well, I loved nothing more than watching those boys on a football team. But I can't fathom what the rationale was for taking us to a football game. I think Father wanted to see a football game. And, you know, Sister Catherine, you know, probably thought, well, maybe this will, you know, get rid of her interest in boys. I have no idea, but I will tell you, one Christmas when I was 12 years old, I was given a calf as my Christmas present. That was one of the best presents I ever got. And I think to this day, Sister Catherine did it hoping that if I spent all my energies taking care of this little calf, I wouldn't get an interest in boys. But I was able to do both at the same time. So.
Great. Gail would like to know, are you still a Catholic?
I am. I'm a very liberal-minded, very open-minded Catholic. I go to Catholic church. My husband is not Catholic, and he didn't want to be Catholic, so we got married in the Episcopal Church. But after his ex-wife died, I was up in Still River, and I asked them to, the abbot, who was one of the original Big Brothers, to bless our marriage. And it's really, really funny because he ended up doing a complete wedding ceremony. And it was the day before my 50th birthday. And my parents were there, and, you know, John and I said, don't do it on the premises. Let's just go somewhere quiet. But I didn't know he was going to do the whole rigmarole. And I think he said, and will you take all the children God will give you or something? I'm thinking, my husband is 60 and I am 50. I hope he doesn't give us too many more children. But yeah, I am Catholic. I love Orthodox churches. I love Lutheran churches, but I love, and I know the church has had horrific issues and problems, but that to me doesn't mean that the church itself has a problem. So, and I think this Pope is awesome.
Great. Kendra says, I read your story and you are very brave. I admired your determination. I respect your love for your parents. Your anger for Sister Catherine almost feels mommy dearest. Is it misdirected? Do your siblings blame her as much as you do? And do you credit Sister Catherine as the catalyst allowing your worldly entry?
Do I credit her with as the catalyst for what?
Allowing your worldly entry.
Well, she kicked me into the world. And the fact of the matter is she didn't give a hoot. If I had, stumbled and fallen and been in dire poverty or been, gone into a sex, community or whatever, I mean, she did not care any more about me. She never contacted me again. She never cared to look out for me. So I don't feel at all that my anger, to the extent, I don't even have anger to Sister Catherine anymore, because if I were to see her today, I would like to say to her, did something horrific happen to you when you were a child? I cannot fathom that somebody would do that. She had 2 children of her own, but she also was married, and she told my mother once, while my mother still lived up in Still River with her, that her wedding night was the worst night of her life. And I can assure you, Hank, her husband, and I meant to show you a picture, her husband, Hank, was a lovely human being. And she basically, I'm going to just show you, all right, did I pull off, or am I still in a position where I can?
You just have to reshare. I had stopped it.
Oh, you stopped, yeah.
You filled the screen.
So let me just do, I think that was the wrong one. Okay. But I was just, share screening has stopped. Oh, so you have to, are you sharing it with me again?
You should still be able to, or to get back into it. Yeah, I can see your screen now.
Oh, you can. And do you see the pictures?
I don't see this PowerPoint up.
I was just going to show a few more pictures, but Sister Catherine herself was married. They then adopted 2 children, and she never let her daughter date, never let her daughter go out with anyone. And somehow there's some pathology there. I don't know what it is, but I do think she either had a horrific situation in her own childhood, but while all the families were split up, she would go home to her family 3 times a week while we lived in Still River, right till her dying day. And I knew that she was going home to her family. I think other children didn't quite realize what was happening. But so I don't even really hate her now, but I see the harm that she did. I always felt that my parents and I were on one side, and the father and Sister Catherine were on the other side. Now, could they have taken different steps? They could have. They made certain decisions that I probably never would have made, and I certainly wouldn't in environment that I'm in today. But I don't think any, I don't think my displeasure, if I want to do that, or my anger is misdirected. I think others can blame my parents, and I don't find a reason to blame them. I know full well they made certain decisions, and they made those decisions that they felt were best for us, and it turned out far differently from the way they had anticipated it would turn out. But there was a mastermind behind it, and there was someone who broke relationships, and they took this vow of obedience and they obeyed. You could argue that they shouldn't have, but the fact of the matter is I do see Sister Catherine as the mastermind behind. My mother says, I think she just hated sex, which may be true. She never told her son that he was adopted, and he found out he was adopted when he read her obituary. So that's a pretty horrific. So I hope that answers the question about, is my unhappiness or anger, misplaced.
Right. Okay. Rosabelle wanted to know, how was Sister Catherine, I guess she's talking about, how was she a nun if she was married?
Well, so were the 12 couples. They took this vow the others took a vow of celibacy. Sister Catherine had already forced her husband into a vow of celibacy. And that happens. I mean, there are people, and but this was a very unusual religious order. You know, they were forced. I mean, my parents had no intention of taking a vow of celibacy. And father basically went to them and said, "You're the only ones that haven't done it." And so, and I said to them later, I said, "Did you think you would have to leave if you didn't do it?" And my father said, "Yes." They later found out other children had been told the same thing by their parents. So that Father Feeney literally coerced them into renouncing one sacrament and taking a vow of celibacy, which I find, frankly, horrific. Who knows why they didn't want any more children? You know, there have been lots of theories about that among the adults in the community. Were 39 children a financial burden? We certainly were free labor. I know that as we grew older. Or did Sister Catherine just not like the idea, or did one of the couples want to do it? And, you know, that part will never be known. And I think there are just too many different divergent stories on that.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for the questions.
I just want to mention, I think for some people who came in a little later, I have a website, but I also have Facebook and Instagram, and I have wonderful people. I don't have time to do much of that kind of stuff myself, partially because I'm writing a book and just doing other things. But yeah, I'd love you to follow me. I try to keep up with, you know, issues about my book, but also just other things of interest. And I do write blogs. I write for the local paper every 3 weeks. I'm going to do one this coming week, but then I always put them out as a blog on my website. They're not too long, and this one's going to be another Christmas story, which will be about a Christmas when I was 11 years old. What, you know, we didn't have Santa Claus. We had baby Jesus. And Father Feeney always told us that Santa Claus, this is what his words were the Jews trying to make money off St. Nicholas. We grew up in a very anti-Semitic, anti-communist kind of environment. But at any rate, so the story that I'm doing this week was how we were told that we should make presents for baby Jesus. And my story of being 11 years old and making my present for baby Jesus. But I didn't believe in baby Jesus. No, I thought, this is ridiculous. In the same way at that time, I would never have believed in Santa Claus. I was like, baby Jesus, you know. And my book has some funny stories about it, you know, like someone 2 years older than I believed in baby Jesus, and I'm thinking, is she crazy? I mean, what does she think? Baby Jesus walks into a store and buys presents? So I think my mind was a little too prying about things. But so at any rate, if you would love you to look at my website. My book is also on audio, and a wonderful, wonderful gal recorded it. I worked with her. I thought she was great. The editor that was making the decisions about that said, your book reads like a novel, and there are so many characters that she said, you really need someone who has, you know, can do different voices and things like that. So I've been very pleased with it. And of course, it's on Kindle now. It's out in paperback. And and also the other thing I love to do, if any of you is interested, I love talking to book groups, because when I do a book group, you know, you can let people ask questions, because only ask questions. You don't have to tell the story because they've already read the story. So they come with their own questions. And so that's always a lot of fun. So if you want to, you know, me to do a book event, I think you can get a hold of me on my website. I'll make sure that at least you can get through to my my publicists, and they're two wonderful people, and they'll set those kinds of things up if that's something you'd like to do.
Great. And I put your website in the chat, patriciachadwick.com.
Yes.
Just if anybody wants to see it.
Super. Well, thank you so much for being part of this. I appreciate all the questions. I hope you enjoyed it. And my next book's going to be more fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was fascinating hearing you speak. I think everybody appreciated it. So yeah, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and Happy Holidays to everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.